Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dr. Doctor, the show where no topic is too hot or too cold. Whether it's politics, religion, relationships, entertainment, or everyday life, you will be hearing from the experts. This show is not for the faint of heart or the faint of mind. But if you want to be inspired, you have come to the right place. And now, prepare to be enlightened as we introduce the host of Dr. Doctor, Dr. Peter Tassi, and his close advisor, Dr. Fooch.
Welcome back to Dr. Doctor. Thanks for joining us again today. And boy, we've got another great guest today to continue our series of talking about professions and trades, and for you young people, what to consider getting into. Today we're really fortunate to have with us Peter, who is a lawyer. And what a great profession this is, the profession of law. And so we're honored to have Peter with us today, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say to you young people out there about getting into this profession and what this profession is all about. So welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Peter, first of all, what inspired or motivated you to be a lawyer before you went into law? What was it that happened in your life that...
Well, I think part of it certainly was, I always wanted to do something successfully and to be a success, and in the eyes of myself, in the eyes of society, my friends, my family, to do something. So I would mull it over in my mind what the various careers were, and I wanted to do a job that was gratifying, that paid well, and that provided me an opportunity to be a productive member of society. So as a lawyer, I thought of that as a good profession, representing lower income people, advocating for people that perhaps didn't have the skills or the knowledge or the opportunity to do it themselves on self-represented basis, to be gratified by that work by helping people out, in the legal world. And, then there was also that, the aura of working in a courtroom, orchestrating a case and developing a case for a judge, a jury, with all the members of the courtroom present, and sort of that legal arena or that stage was interesting to me, getting into it and what that world would be like to work.
Interesting. What about law itself? Like, okay, so you have the IQ and the ability to have gone into any of the professions, from what I think of you. What was it about law, in addition to that whole, like you say, setting up a case, the theatrical aspect of the courtroom and everything, and helping lower income people? But you could have done similar things if you chose to be a doctor or a dentist, or, well, not a courtroom with a dentist in that respect, but there are so many professions where you could have helped people. It was challenging, it was well respected. What was it about law?
I think the development of argument was interesting to me. I've always sort of had an interest in in political figures that are strong orators and convincing people with oratorical skills that that would sway opinion. And perhaps I think I've always thought it very interesting to be able to, through argument and persuasive language and theory, to change someone's opinion from what it currently is to something else that you want them to believe. And that's certainly the case when you're trying to convince a judge, when you're trying to convince the client, or the adversarial party or their counsel, and based on research, based on work, putting those argumentative pieces of the puzzle together that make the case strong, and that you're confident that you can win and change that opinion. Yeah, so I thought that was an interesting feature, which kind of always interested me back in the day.
Fascinating. That's interesting. Yes, the power of persuasion, the ability to argue and change opinion. That certainly is a big part of the legal profession.
Right, for sure it is, yeah. That's how cases are won and lost.
Now, is law considered, would you consider it a good profession for young people? Like, it's hard to get into law school. You have to do well on the LSAT, as I understand.
Yeah, the LSAT's part of it.
The LSAT's difficult, yeah. And then you have to have good marks in university. So given that a young person does well in school, is an honor student, would you say that it's a good profession for them to consider?
I think it very much depends on the person and the personality of the individual. So I've met people that really enjoy practicing law, and I've met other people that have decided in their life that it was perhaps the wrong decision to make, or it's time for a change, a career change, because they just can't live to do it anymore.
Right.
And, so it's a personality thing. I've met kids, high school students and so on, that I look at saying, yeah, there's I could see potential there for that student, that young person, to be interested in the challenges, the hardships, the struggles, and the potential prosperity at the end of the day with the legal profession. Whereas with other students, you get the idea that perhaps they're not, they may not be as interested in a legal profession, and there's other professions out there that would they'd be more inclined to, perhaps art or medical or business. Okay.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's a personality thing on one hand, and I think for the young person, having to be prepared for a challenging profession, which involves many hours of work, which involves ups and downs, which involves the acceptance that you're not going to necessarily be making a lot of money right away, that you have to put a lot of work into it. So you're working at the beginning, so you have to accept that fact as a young person, that, getting into the beginning stages of your career, you're going to be putting in a lot of hours and not being compensated for all that time and effort that you're putting in.
Why is that? Because you're working in a firm, and why is that you have to put in so many hours and not really be compensated for your time?
Well, I think part of it is the sharp learning curve that's involved with being a lawyer. There's a huge upfront amount of knowledge and research base that you need to be that you need to know to be able to be successful at it. And so after 3 to 5 years, you develop that knowledge base, the skill base, the experience running files, drafting claims, conducting research, resolving issues, and so on. That after, I use the 3 to 5 year period as sort of that period where you start to feel comfortable with what you're doing, and you're not spending 5 or 10 hours trying to resolve an issue with research and thinking and analyzing, because you've done that before.
Interesting.
So you're saving time. So you start to level off that sharp learning curve. But it's also a matter of, it's not only knowing the law and analyzing legal issues and researching cases and legislation, it's also about figuring out people. So it's a people profession, how to deal with difficult clients. So you could rack your brain for a half a day on a problematic client that you're to meet the next day, and how to deal with this person, because they're perhaps an opposite personality to what you are. They fly off the rails, or maybe they're super quiet and reserved and trying to draw out information from them. So after years of dealing with people, you get to know how to manage people, how to get what you need out of them, the information in the case out of them efficiently, effectively, and time efficient, essentially.
Time efficiency, yes. So in the beginning, you might be able to handle 5 cases in a certain period of time. 5 years later, you can handle 20 because you're working quicker, you understand the system, so you make more money. In the first 3 to 5 years, what can a lawyer expect to make a year? What would be considered, is there like a salary we could pick?
Well, okay, so I think it depends on certain factors. It depends on geographically where you're working. Okay, typically if you're working in Toronto, you're making more than you would be earning in Hamilton, and perhaps significantly more than you would be earning in a smaller town, because standard of living and cost of living varies between the big city and the small town. So depending on where you're living, that dictates what you can expect to earn.
I see.
On one hand, and the other factor that is important is the area of law that you're practicing in. Okay, so you tend to find students that get into corporate law when they merge from law school into articling and the beginning stages of practice. Those in the corporate law field tend to earn a bit more because they're working for firms in the big city that that charges a high rate per hour for services. So those are generating higher salaries, but that also means, and what I've come to realize is significantly longer hours per day having to work to earn the significantly higher pay. That's the compromise. Okay.
I see.
Getting into civil litigation, getting into administrative law, other areas, criminal law, you're starting off perhaps at the low end. So if I was to give a range to it, I mean, a good salary for an articling student, if we were to look at Hamilton,
yes, would
be say $45,000, $50,000 a year. Okay, to start off as an articling student, that would be a good, reasonable salary. And the first year of practice, let's say between the first year and 3 years into it, if you could get up to 60 to 70,000 working in Hamilton, that would be a good, reasonable range to aspire to.
Right. Once you've been in 3 to 5 years and you're kind of a master at what you're doing, although it depends, like you say, on what branch of law you study, but what would be an average, like for not a corporate lawyer, let's say one of the other lawyers, what would be the average range?
So for a civil litigator, let's say, who's practicing in personal injury and employment law and maybe some commercial litigation, business litigation type of matters, I'd say after 5 years, earning $90,000 to $100,000 would be a reasonable expectation, provided you're willing to see. The other difference is how aggressive do you intend to work? How many hours do you intend to put in per week?
Right.
So that $90,000 to $100,000, I mean, that's a lawyer that's probably working 50 to 60 hours a week.
Yeah. For a high-end profession like that, it's not that much money. When you compare it to other professions, that is, but it's fulfilling and rewarding as well, isn't it, law? Or tell me, what are the drawbacks to practicing law?
So there are positives and negatives. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages. I mean, one of the drawbacks relates to that time commitment, right? So I've seen it happen time and time again where the lawyer ends up having to work the 50, the 60, perhaps even up to 70 hours a week. And something's got to give. You can't be at the office for that many hours and not be compromising something else in life. So what's important in life? I mean, what may you have to be giving up? Family responsibilities. So, if you're married with kids, I mean, that's often the compromise. So that's a drawback.
Yes.
Not being able. So a lot of these individuals, they end up 10, 20, 30 years into the practice not having a very solid relationship with their kids because they haven't been able to put the time in for the soccer or the activities, and dropping off at school or whatever.
I've had doctors that I know share that with me. Big drop.
And I could see that as being a problem in the medical profession as well with doctors,
So that's one of the negatives, the amount of time. Just to go back to the wages, though, again, can a lawyer be putting in that much time? And we see lawyers that are very wealthy. Could they be making $300,000-$400,000 a year and doing that? Why is it that there's such a spectrum? Because I've heard of lawyers making $25,000 a year and lawyers making $500,000 a year. I don't know if what I've been told is true. And both seem to be workers. Both seem the spectrum. They seem to be. They're not shrugging work or anything, but for some it seems to work very well, outside above that median we talked about, and for some it does not work out good. How do you explain that?
Well, it goes to being an effective business person. Running a law practice is running a business in essence. Okay, so some are effective business owners and practitioners, and others are not.
Interesting.
And so that's a heavy factor because to earn that type of money, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, it's one of a few different types of possibilities. I mean, in personal injury law, for example, you have lawyers who are tapped into mass referral system. So various accidents that happen, individuals calling the firm, they sift out the various good files from the bad. So for 10 calls, there may be one hit there. That's the $1 million file, or maybe it's 20 or 30 calls, but it's a significant amount of calls that come in, and the lawyer's looking for that one hit. And if you're working on a contingency fee basis, then you may be getting 20-25% of that $1 million case.
Right. Oh, I see. Then you're looking at the bigger money.
You get a few of those a year.
You mentioned the negative there about the time away from the family. Is there another negative about law that you could think of that our viewers should hear about?
Well, I think anyone looking at a law practice has to appreciate that it's known as an adversarial profession for a reason. The adversarial nature of the legal world. So you're dealing with. I think in law you tend to deal with difficult people at a higher rate and a higher level than you would in almost any other profession.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Because it's so contentious. So matters that come to your door, clients that you have to represent, are having a significant problem, a problem that they can't deal with on their own. So that's why they come to you for your expertise and know-how and ability to run a litigation matter, for example. And so the stress and the anxiety of the client is at a significantly high level, financially, emotionally, socially.
Right.
If it's a family law problem, or if it's a business problem, or they've just lost their job and you're trying to get income flowing in. So that's a heavy burden to take,
Yes.
and you're not having to take that for one person. You're having to take that perhaps for 20 or 30 different clients at any given point in time.
Wow.
So having to deal with that, manage that, and not carry that home with you and sleep at night with that on your head, that's a huge challenge to have to get used to.
Absolutely. That's almost like being a lawyer and a social worker and a psychologist and
You're all of that.
you're all of that, even pastoral in some way, isn't it? Like,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
And you're also an economist. You have to manage their financial affairs, and you've got to put that business hat on from time to time. So you're playing all of these different roles in any given case, and flipping roles, quite often throughout the day.
Interesting. What you mentioned a few aspects of law there. What would you recommend to young people, or maybe like you said in the beginning, it depends on personality. But what aspect of law would you recommend, if any specific one?
Well, I think it depends on what the individual really is interested in. Like, so I've met some young people and some lawyers that have an interest in criminal law because it's interesting, and you're often in court a fair bit compared to civil litigators who are not in court as often. So if the interest is to be in court on a daily basis and sort of working off the seat of your pants and moving from courtroom to courtroom and many dealings throughout the day, and the day goes by fast with that type of work, criminal law is a good profession to get into because it's very much like that. Family law as well, along those lines of the daily court work type of litigation. But, if the interest is to be sort of solo, working in the office independently, drafting and conducting research and more on the phone, dealing with clients and other counsel and so on, then civil litigation is perhaps a good route to take, because that's what a main part of the job is: drafting pleadings, factums, conducting research, and in court, not as often.
Interesting. So going back to what we were talking about before, the positives and negatives, I guess a positive is that if that's your desire in life to do something along the lines of what you're explaining there, whether it's arguing court or solo business work, law gives you the options to choose what suits your personality and your own passions.
Sure. There's a wide variety of options in the legal profession. If business is your interest, there's business law, corporate law area that's totally open and alive and relevant.
Overall, what would you say is the positives of law?
I think
the most gratifying.
Yeah, I think the nature of the practice can lead to some very positive experiences. For example, the exhilaration of being in the courtroom and running a case, running a trial, is very exciting and can be very rewarding. When you're successful at a trial or on a motion in court or a settlement of a case, perhaps resolving a criminal case or settling a civil case, and obtaining a favorable result for the client, that can be very rewarding, very gratifying in the sense that you've reached
something great,
accomplishment.
Something good,
yeah.
Do you find that you've done cases and then 5 years later you're still reflecting on those cases in a positive way that makes you feel good?
Oh, for sure.
Or do you tend to forget them?
Sometimes there's the case here and there that it has some important element to it that makes you draw back and think about it, and especially if you've done a good result for the client and you may meet the client 3, 5, 7 years later, and they thank you that their life has been changed for the better because of what you've done. That's the type of power and capability that you have as a lawyer to make a difference in someone's life. The flip side, though, is when you lose that trial or when you don't get that favorable result in that case, then you can experience the downside risk in someone's life, and where it turns for the worse. And that's not necessarily your fault as a lawyer.
No.
You can only work with the facts and the evidence that you have.
Right.
But you can't allow that to weigh on your head. You've got to sort of let that go and focus on those positives.
Which is a hard thing to do. I mean, I think that, doctors, surgeons, teachers, like you say, when you do something years later, people will come back and thank you for saving their life or changing their life. And then other cases where people might feel like it didn't go their way and you should have done it differently. That's hard. That's difficult.
Yeah, so you're
Even
constantly...
though they may be misjudging the whole situation, that's a difficult...
Sure.
Yeah.
That's why you got to cover your tail with letters and documentation to support the route that the client ends up choosing, and that it's backed up with your opinion and with support.
Yes.
For that.
Now, with criminal law, I know this is a question probably you've been asked 1,000 times, and people often talk about it. The laity, like myself, how does a lawyer defend someone, whether it's criminal or corporate or some real estate deal? How do you defend someone who is guilty?
So if we look at that the terms of guilt and innocent or guilty in the criminal law context, criminal law world. So, I mean, if you're a criminal defense lawyer and you're representing someone who's charged with a crime, first and foremost, it's not your job as that person's criminal defense lawyer to prove their innocence. Okay? So we, under our constitutional system, accused individuals have the right to being deemed innocent until proven guilty. So right off the bat, the responsibility is on the Crown, the burden is on the Crown to prove that individual's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Okay? So you don't have to advance a position, any evidence in support of the innocence, and putting and maintaining that weight on the Crown. Okay,
right.
So that's
an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah,
that's the first thing that comes about. If the client reveals something, or reveals evidence that puts you into a compromise, there are a couple possible options. I mean, one is to simply not put the individual on the witness stand to proclaim and give evidence supporting that they're innocent, purporting facts that are not true. So that puts the administration of justice in disrepute, and it's unethical. It's in violation of the Law Society rules to be drawing evidence out of a witness that is false, that they've given you a contrary story in your office within those four walls. So you can't do that. And some extreme compromises require the lawyer to bring a motion to get off the record. And because they're put into a situation where they can't ethically continue to represent that client in the case. And so those motions are brought from time to time when that compromise is too overbearing.
Interesting. Now, do you think that, although it's the burden of the Crown to prove that their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, do you think that a lawyer having the knowledge that their client is guilty would, although they will defend them and give them their constitutional rights, would it affect their performance in any way, even if it's a few percentage points?
It may not. It depends on the individual. Some lawyers, some individuals, their personality, they don't waver. They don't get tainted by that. Especially, with experience. Years into it, you find the lawyer who's been at it 20 or 30 years doesn't get frazzled by what they hear in the office. They're too focused on what they know about what is going to happen in that courtroom and the process that's required and the rules that are relied upon and how to harness the evidence and what those requirements are. So morally speaking, I mean, when you hear something in your office that perhaps takes away from the integrity of the case, at the end of the day, the lawyer's responsibility to that client surpasses everything else. You have a duty of confidentiality to that client, that you don't release any information that's said within those four walls without that client's consent. And that's an integral rule of the profession that can't be broken.
It's like a priest can't reveal confessional.
Exactly. It's along those lines.
Yeah. Just lastly, Peter, I wanted to ask you, for those young people out there who maybe for whatever reason don't want to be a lawyer, would you recommend the other professions like paralegal? There's other courses they can take and programs.
Working for the government. Yep.
Working for the government. But specifically with law, like paralegals or...
law clerks.
Law clerks, sorry. Yeah. Would you recommend those professions? And I think those are easier. They are easier. They're like 1-year courses or 2-year courses in college. So let's say someone doesn't have the aptitude for university but loves the idea of law. Are those professions, law clerks and paralegals, good professions for young people to get into, or is it still kind of underpaid and risky? What's your feeling?
Well, I'd say the paralegal profession is a strong, viable profession and an interesting one to get into for someone who doesn't want to go the full mile of being a lawyer and with all that weight and burden that's attached to it. So, for example, a paralegal wouldn't require a university degree or any years at university for that matter. Normally it's a 1 or 2 year program, like you pointed out. The private colleges often offer the 1-year program. The community colleges, Mohawk or Sheridan, would offer it in a 2-year program. So that's post secondary school, high school diploma. Right. With that, and then there's a licensing exam requirement with the Law Society, because the Law Society of Ontario regulates the paralegal profession. You have to undergo the required program and the licensing examination with the Law Society in order to become licensed to practice as a paralegal. And paralegals can do quite a bit out there in the legal world, much of which lawyers can do. There's certain jurisdictions that paralegals are able to practice.
Restrictions there, of
right.
course, yeah.
Right.
But would you say is it financially and personally can be fulfilling and a good life?
I think it can be. You don't make, rare. I haven't run into a paralegal that's earning some of the numbers that we were talking about, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 a year. Right. But I know of paralegals that earn 100,000 a year within that range. Wow. And that's after time being into it. It's not after the 3 to 5 year period that we talked about with a lawyer. It's perhaps after 10 years.
Right.
So the paralegal is earning, less. So it depends on what the expectation is.
That's a real good wage.
It is, but because paralegals can do POA work, a full range of POA, Provincial Offences Act.
Provincial Offences.
So your Highway Traffic Act, your bylaw infringements, there's a full range of jurisdiction within there. So that's an area that defendants often want to retain, and if they can pay a paralegal less than what they would have to pay a lawyer, there's an incentive to go to a paralegal that knows what he or she is doing and has been at it for a while and is effective in the courtroom in that area. So those are the paralegals that tend to be successful and earn more.
What about law clerks?
And law clerks, first of all, are not a regulated profession. Oftentimes, though, the law clerk will have studied at a college in the law clerk program and obtaining a diploma certificate in the area. But law clerk is an interesting profession. With the law clerk profession, it takes the weight off of having to be an advocate. So law clerks are behind the scenes, assisting the lawyer or assisting the paralegal. But most often it's the lawyer that they're working for that requires law clerk assistance. So they're drafting, conducting research, dealing with clients, phone calls, scheduling appointments, and so on. But the law clerk is a heavy responsibility. Lawyers rely, a huge amount of responsibility on the law clerks that work for them, and it's an interesting profession for someone that wishes to remain in the office and dealing behind the scenes on the files.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. Well, we've been very fortunate to have you on our program today, Dr. Doctor. We want to thank you, Peter, and we'd love to have you back again. In addition to be a lawyer, you're a great actor, and you have your own theater company, and boy, it would be good to have you back and talk about the theater business. There's another fascinating world that a lot of young people are interested in becoming actors and getting into entertainment and theater. Their whole life as a high school student is theater, but there are things they have to watch out for.
That's right.
And that world, how difficult it is but how wonderful it is as well and fulfilling. So if you would come back and join us again, that would be great.
For sure.
And thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
And thanks for joining us on Dr. Doctor. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and we wishing you a great day and a great week. Thank you.